Hey, give everybody just a little bit of time to come in. I should have started with my little countdown, um, but I forgot it. So, nonetheless, here we are. Welcome, welcome. Come in, come in, come in. We will hang out just for a little bit while we give people an opportunity to get the notifications. I tried to do it close to lunchtime, so that way some of you might would be on lunch and be able to catch this. So I also have my phone pulled up so that I can see when people are joining, and so that I can also see if there is anybody in the comments. So come on in, guys. Giving you a little bit of therapy on this Tuesday. Hope that your Tuesday is going well. I think this is Fat Tuesday, uh, in I guess celebration of Mardi Gras. So if you have plans for today, I hope that you're eating good. All right, nonetheless. But like I said, come on in. We got a heavy, heavy topic to talk about today, but I think that it is a good topic. I did a live on Saturday, and it was talking about healing the inner child. And the video was just a little bit blotchy, but you're able to go back and watch that and hopefully be able to really pull some of the meat out of the parts that weren't too blotchy. Didn't realize until after the fact that it was actually like an internet outage in my area, so it was affecting my streaming capabilities. So, nonetheless, we are here today and we're going to be talking about trauma bonding. Trauma bonding. And so I'll give people another minute or two to get the notifications and maybe get to a place where they're able to join. And like I said, I'm just looking back and forth from my phone and also to the computer because I was not able to see my notifications or my chats on Saturday. And so I don't want to miss the chat or miss anything that may come up while we are talking today. So come on in the room. It's kind of therapy for real because I've invited you into my office, right? And so I think it is definitely going to be good, definitely going to be just some information. So while I'm waiting on people to come in, most of you that are on my friends list know me, but some of you that may know me from different avenues may not necessarily know what I do, for day to day. So, my background is in mental health, and I have been in the mental health field for over 20 years. I have experience working with children and adolescents who have behavioral problems. I've worked with women who were in abusive relationships. I've worked in the prison systems with inmates who had maximum security type situations for murder, severe mental illness. And currently, I work with veterans. So the bulk of my work has been with people who have experienced trauma in some capacity. And I also do a lot of relationship, marriage and family therapy. And that's one of the things that typically comes up in my interactions with relationships. You find people that have trauma bonded. And you may hear that term kind of thrown out loosely, but my goal today is just to provide education so that you hear it, you know what it is, but also so that you know exactly what it means. So as you're coming in, I want to make sure that my chat is working. I see that I have someone watching. If you could put something in the chat so that I can see if I can see it, but also I want to know who I'm talking to. I like to interact when people are on here. So put something in the chat if you don't mind so I can make sure that it's working. And I also want to make sure that you are able to also hear me and also able to um, see me clearly. And I know that, many of you are working, but I have to try to get this stuff out when I can get it out And so I didn't have a whole lot going on today. And I was actually supposed to do this live yesterday, but me and a coworker ended up supporting the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. And so we were not able to do it. I wasn't able to do it. So we will get started. So we will get started in 1 second. Let me respond to this message because I am at work. So let me respond to this, and I am going to jump right into it. All right, guys. So what are we talking about today? So we are talking about trauma bonding. And again, I did a live over the weekend that did a little bit of background to give you a little bit of understanding about childhood trauma. And I was telling you that a lot of times when people are traumatized during their childhood, it creates sometimes different personas. But if that childhood trauma isn't adequately dealt with, and if they don't heal, those behaviors then transfer and follow them into adulthood, and it can create toxic patterns of behavior. And so, because of that childhood trauma, you typically hear about trauma bonding. So, let's talk about it. I want to give you a little bit of biblical background and give you a biblical story that gives a great depiction of trauma that happened in the Bible. We don't often talk a lot about people that lived during those days who experienced trauma. We can speculate, we can guess, we can assume that many of those that we hear about and we discuss even present day to some capacity, they also experience trauma. And one that definitely comes to mind when I think about trauma and how someone was greatly impacted by trauma was the story of Tamar. And so if you have your Bibles, turn with me to 2 Samuel 13. We will be coming out of 2 Samuel, the 13th chapter. And again, as you are coming in, if you will put something in the comments so that I know that you are there, make sure that you can hear me and hear me. Yes, hear me and see me. Okay. All right, 2 Samuel 13 chapter, talking about trauma bonding. So in verse 13, it reads, "And it happened afterwards that Absalom, the son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, her half brother, the son of David, was in love with her." So even right there, we can assume that Tamar was a teenager, right? And then it said that Amnon was so frustrated because of his half sister that he made himself sick, for she was a virgin, and Amnon thought it impossible for him to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very shrewd, cunning man. So he said to Amnon, "Why are you, the king's son, so depressed morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" And Amnon said to him, "I am in love with Tamar." So let's put a pause right there. So right there, we know that the love that he had for her was unpure. It was defiled because this is his half sister. But he was so in love with her that now he's making himself sick. He's depressed because he's in love with his half sister. So then it goes on to say, Jonadab said to him, "Go to bed and pretend you are sick. And when your father David comes to see you, say to him, 'Just let my sister Tamar come and serve me food, and let her prepare it in my sight so that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please, let my sister Tamar come and make me a couple of cakes in my sight, so that I might eat from her hand." Then David sent word to the house for Tamar, saying, "Go now to your brother Amnon's house and prepare some food for him." So put a pause right there. So when we talk about trauma bonding and we talk about how children are typically traumatized, why didn't David in that moment think it odd that he wanted his sister to come and give him food? because he's the parent, right? So why did not David, as Tamar's father, question Amnon's motive? But he didn't. He was completely blind to his motives. So Tamar went to his brother Amnon's house, and he was in bed. And she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and baked them. She took the pan and dished them out before him, but he refused to eat it. And Amnon said, have everyone leave me. So everyone left him except Tamar. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the bedroom so that I may eat from your hand. So Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the bedroom to her half brother Amnon. When she brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said, come lie with me, my sister. She replied, no, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. Let's put another pause right there. So during those times, we know that you had to be a virgin to be married. During the marriage ceremony, they would have to come out with the sheets, and the sheets would have to have blood on them, showing that she was indeed a virgin and her hymen had been broken. So she knows, even at this moment, that if her brother goes in and violates her because she is a virgin, then she'd be scarred forever. Even so, to the point that should she get married and try to hide this secret, and her husband or his family find out that she wasn't in fact a virgin, she would be stoned to death. So that's why this was so important for her to not be violated in such a manner, because again, during those times, you had to be a virgin in order to be married. So she said, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. 13. As for me, how could I get rid of my shame and disgrace? And you will be considered one of the fools in Israel. So now just speak to the king about taking me as your wife, for he will not withhold me from you. So she's saying, go talk to the king. David, right? Go talk to the king, for he won't withhold anything from you. So she is so willing to not have her reputation defiled that she's now willing to marry her half brother. That's incest. She would rather be in an ancestral marriage than to have herself violated and not be able to get married at all. But he would not listen to her. And since he was stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. So that means he raped her. We're talking about trauma. But he would not listen to her. And since he was stronger than she, he violated her and he lay with her. This is the story of Tamar, if you're just joining me now in verse 15. Then Amnon became extremely hateful towards her, for his hatred toward her was greater than the love which he had for her. Okay, so hold up. So Amnon was so in love with Tamar, his half sister, that he pretended to be sick to cause her to come in and give him food. He got what he wanted. But then after he got what he wanted, he hated her. So not only is Tamar violated by her brother sexually, now she's also violated by him emotionally. Trauma. She was raped by her brother, and then she was emotionally abused by him. Trauma. But he said, and Amnon said to her, get up and get out. Get up and get out after he's raped her. But she said, no, because this wrong of sending me away is worse than the other that you have done to me. But he would not listen to her. Instead, he called his young man, who was his personal servant, and said, now throw this woman out of my presence and bolt the door behind her. Now Tamar was wearing a long sleeve robe of various colors, for that is how the virgin daughters of the king dressed themselves in robes. Then Amnon's personal servant took her out and bolted the door behind her. So Tamar put dust on her head in grief and tore the long sleeve robe which she had on, and she put her hand on her head and went away crying out for help. Verse 20. So her brother Absalom said to her, has your brother Amnon been with you? Pause. Why did Absalom know that it was Amnon? How did he know that it was Amnon? Why would, of all the people that he could have thought of that had violated Tamar, why did he think that it was Amnon? right? Think about that for a moment. Why did he think it was him? But now keep silent, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this matter to heart. So, we're talking about secrets that are kept in families. So, she has been raped by her brother, and her other brother knows that it's happened, and he tells her to be quiet. So, this is the trauma of secrets. Many of us have been passed down through generations where there's secrets, right? And a lot of times you hear about where, maybe the grandfather was abusive, and then, because he was abusive to his grandchildren, now they're abusive, but nobody says anything about it. So now there's a secret in the family. So again, Tamar has been violated sexually by her brother. She's been violated emotionally because now he threw her out. But now also her other brother knows, and he says, shh, don't take it to heart. She's been raped, and he's telling her, don't take this to heart, right? This is trauma. Now, when King David, her father, King David is her father, when he heard about all these things, he was angry, but he didn't do nothing about it. King David heard about all these things. He was very angry, but he failed to take action. So, David, your daughter, Tamar, was raped by her brother, your son. You got mad, but you didn't do anything about it. Doesn't that sound a lot like what happens in families? Talking about trauma. Someone is violated. And then maybe that person that was violated in the family gets up the courage, they get up the nerve to now tell somebody, hoping that they'll be vindicated, hoping that they'll be protected, and nothing is done about it. Not only is not anything done about it, now they tell you to be quiet and don't talk about it. What happens in the house stays in the house. You already know the rest. Trauma. This is how trauma is sometimes ingrained from generation to generation. She was traumatized. Now, we're going to talk about David just for a minute to help you understand how this trauma was passed down generationally. So then it says, now, when King David heard about all these things, he was very angry, but he failed to take action. Verse 22, but Absalom did not speak to Amnon either good or bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. So Absalom was upset. He was mad too that he had violated his sister, but he didn't do anything about it either. He just was mad. People being mad about things happening to you, number one, it doesn't change the fact that it happened. And that does not give you any sort of reassurance in regards to them protecting you to ensure that it's not going to happen again. So let me just pause just for a second. If you are watching, say hello. I'm going to check and see because my comments ain't working. So I want to make sure that if you are commenting, I can see it. So if you say hello so that I can see if there's anybody in the comments. All right. Say hello to me so I can talk to you. If you have questions, definitely let me know. We're talking about trauma bonding. All right. So let's talk a little bit about David. So we know that David was a part of the house of Jesse. And when they were looking to anoint a king, y'all can remember, like, nobody wanted David, right? Nobody picked David. Like, David was hated by his brothers. But David ended up being king. So think about growing up in a house where you are not welcomed, you're not appreciated, like nobody wants you, like you are the black sheep of the family. So David had his own trauma in regards to being rejected, not fitting in. That creates trauma, right? And so he was hated by his brothers. So here's something that I found in my research. Speculation suggests that David's mother had been married to Nahash when she bore the half sisters and then later became the second wife of Jesse. So we can assume that the mother that was living in Jesse's house was not David's mother, it was his stepmother. So we only can assume how David might have been treated by his stepmother. Some of you may have step parents to where they treated you differently than the children that were maybe born out of the union between the other two set of parents, right? And you become a step step sibling and you have step parent. So here's what else I learned. Further speculation implies that David's mother was not yet married to Jesse when she became pregnant, that perhaps she was still married to Nahash when she conceived David. Did y'all hear me? So let me back up. It's kind of like, Days of Our Lives, like it's a soap opera unfolding. So I'm going to say that one more time. David's mother was not yet married to Jesse when she became pregnant with David. So David's mother was still married to Nahash when David was conceived. So that means his mother had an affair, which takes us to Psalm 51 and 5, when David says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." Whew, I just gave y'all revelation. So David's mother had an affair with Jesse. So that's how he came about. So we're talking about how David had trauma, right? And we don't know all the details as far as maybe what other trauma David may have uh, experienced growing up in a house of being a stepchild. But we also know that there was something that was going on with David's mother, because why would she have an affair and she was married, right? And we don't know the details, but again, I just want to help you understand how trauma can be passed down, because David experienced trauma, right? So now he breeds children. Tamar, raped by her half brother. Then she has another brother who knew that the rape happened and didn't say anything. This is trauma. Trauma breeds secrets. So he's in a hold house, like David may have had secrets being in the house of Jesse. So now, because he grew up keeping secrets, when he has the opportunity to now maybe come forth and protect his children, he can't, because secrecy has now become a part of our normal. Whew, I'm going to set y'all free today. Trauma breeds secrecy, and it's hard to get free when you can't be truthful. So trauma bonding. What is trauma bonding? All right. Trauma bonding is a type of attachment that can form between two people. Here, number one, who have gone through a traumatic experience together, or more likely may share a compatible attachment pattern that stems from emotional trauma. So, what that's saying is people may bond, like if we are going through the same traumatic experience together, right? That creates a bond. But people also trauma bond if maybe during my childhood I was abused, so I get with somebody else who maybe in their childhood was abused. And although we didn't share that traumatic experiences, we share a traumatic background, and that creates a bond. This bond is characterized by feelings of dependency, neediness, and fear. So, going back to the live that I did on Saturday, I told you a little bit about the developmental stage of psychosocial development, and how, depending on where a person is traumatized, it also leaves an imprint almost like on their DNA. And so if they are traumatized at different stages, it also creates different emotional responses. One of those was codependency, being dependent on another. And that is typically formed during the stage of trust versus mistrust. Because if I have the inability to trust others, either I become too trusting and overly dependent, or I completely detach myself from people and I'm able to form emotional attachments. So it can come about in a couple of different ways. The connection can be very strong. It can feel genuine. It can feel genuine. We know that our feelings lie to us because the Bible tells us that the heart is deceitful. It's wicked. Who can understand it? So you have this emotional feeling and you think that you're in love and you think that the feeling that you are experiencing is genuine, but your heart just lied to you because it's deceitful. And then it goes on to say it can make it difficult for the people involved to leave the relationship, even if it's harmful, because we've bonded over trauma. The trauma bond is formed as a result of regular cycles of emotional or physical abuse, depreciation, and periodic positive reinforcement. So, what that looks like is there's negative and there's positive. There's negative and there's positive. So, the whole bond is formed over this push and pull type of interaction. For example, your partner may constantly put you down and then apologize and buy you flowers after a big argument. Over time, you start to believe that you need your partner in order to feel good about yourself. Because come on, we know how good it makes us feel when somebody does something nice for us, especially after an argument. Why, grown folks here, why do you think people feel that makeup sex is so intense? Grown folks now, why is that even a thing? It's because of the emotional response that comes behind the negativity. And we're going to talk about what that does to the body in just a second. I'm just giving you examples. This is an unhealthy attachment that can be very difficult to break free from. So, we talked about what trauma bonding is. And again, if you were a person that was traumatized early in life, either through abuse, neglect, or any other forms of trauma, you are already in predisposed, you are predispositioned to be more open to experiencing a trauma bond because you have unhealthy patterns of behavior, you have unhealed areas in your heart, and it makes you more vulnerable, right? So that's why people that have experienced things in their childhood need to go through healing. They need to go through deliverance. They need to go to therapy so that they can talk about these unhealthy patterns of behavior. Because if you have come from a family that is dysfunctional, you may not even realize that your patterns of behavior, your styles of communication, the way that you interact, the way that you perceive the world is abnormal. But in fact, your perception may cause you to believe that it is normal because you live around. That's all you've known. And so the only way that you know that it is not normal is if somebody holds up a mirror or if somebody models a different mode of behavior for you so that you're now better able to identify that these patterns of behavior are in fact unhealthy and they're harmful. So what are the signs of trauma bonding? Childhood trauma bonds are characterized by an imbalance of power between the parent and child, with the parent providing both positive and negative attention. This can be confusing for the child who may feel both grateful for the parent's positive attention and responsible for the parent's outburst of negativity. I've also oftentimes seen where parents that struggle with mental health, bipolar, schizophrenia, like maybe more of the more severe spectrum of mental illness, that can be traumatizing for the children. Although the child may not have necessarily been physically abused, although the child may have not necessarily been sexually abused, there's a lot of emotional abuse that goes into that because these parents, especially those that may have bipolar, where they have these extreme highs and extreme lows, it can be quite confusing for a child experiencing that because today, if the parent is manic, the mom may say, hey, we're going shopping and we're going to go buy everything because the parent is in a manic episode. Well, then the very next day, if that parent crashes from that manic episode and now they're experiencing deep depression, they're withdrawn, they're not able to communicate. Or even the other extreme of that, what if they become angry all of a sudden? And so that creates this emotional confusion for that child with not knowing what to expect from that parent, but also not knowing how to interact. So it makes it difficult to know, again, what are appropriate interactions when it comes to relationships. And not only relationships, again, in regards to like maybe an intimate relationship, but sometimes these people may also struggle with building friend relationships. They may have difficulty in developing positive coworker interactions, right? And so trauma bonding is not just the reactions or the way that we interact with partners or our spouses, but it could also be how we interact with those that are around us, friends, coworkers, things of that nature. This can be confusing for the child, again, who may be grateful for the good, but also confused by the negativity. As a result, a child's self-esteem becomes shaped by their perceptions of their parents' opinions and regards. And this can become a very unstable and self-deprecating base for the adult emotional life. Trauma bonding can happen between the child, an abusive caregiver. So this may be somebody who did experience physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or any other adult. Sometimes I've seen even on the news lately where you have these grandparents who are just doing horrific things to their grandchildren. And so I would assume that probably in those cases that grandparent may have also been the person that's inflicting trauma on the child. It can also be other family members or sometimes even friends. And then another one that you may not even consider is like victims of oh my God, they're being held hostage, they're kidnappers, sex trafficking, that's what it's called. So victims that have experienced sex trafficking, they also experience trauma bonding. And what that looks like is, although that person that is experiencing that may have the opportunity to run or leave, they don't. Right. And it can be the same for true that people that have been kidnapped, they find it difficult to break free because they've had a trauma bond. Oh, I'm about to dig just a little bit. And so the other thing that it mentioned is members of a cult. Right. So let me take it a deep further for you deep saints. Is it possible to have experienced a trauma bond because of church? I'm gonna look down and see if I got any comments. Is it possible to have experienced trauma bonding through church? Is it possible for a person to experience trauma bonding through church? So what does that look like? We oftentimes think about or even talk about when it comes to religious. So like maybe the religious mindset. And we know that all churches are not necessarily good. So what if this is a case study, doing a case study? So what if this individual maybe grew up in church, born and raised in the church? But what if this person was sexually abused at the hands of a leader in the church, and they caused this person to believe that maybe the abuse was ordained by God? Maybe they told this person that the abuse was how they honored the leader. Maybe they were told that the abuse that they were experiencing was normal, it was natural. So you have a person who is in an organization, a religion, who has now taught them that the abuse that they're also experiencing is a part of that religion. Are you following me? We're talking about how a trauma bond can be formed as a result of religion. So when that person grows up into adulthood and maybe they learn better, they can struggle with embracing the institution of church. They can really struggle with embracing the idea of God, because the God that they grew up with allowed certain things to happen to them. This is in their mind because they were told that. And because they were manipulated in their mind and they were told all of these negative things, it has now shifted their whole view and they can't see anything past that. Again, if I grew up in a religion where it was okay for me to be abused, and then as an adult, you tell me that this same God is a loving God, he's a kind God. And so you will see people that as they become adults, they struggle because people are trying to tell them that what they experienced was not okay, but they find it so difficult to even leave from that religion because of what was taught to them. Right. And even a lot of these extreme religions, I think about people who were born like maybe in the Mormon church. And I don't know a lot about Mormons, but I do know that it's very strict, and maybe even to some degree can present itself somewhat kind of cult like. And so those people have the opportunity to maybe branch out. Like there's a whole TV show where these people are like leaving the Amish religion, leaving like the Amish lifestyle, but they can't because they've trauma bonded with it, right? And so being in a trauma bond looks totally different depending on where your trauma took place. And then for many of us, our trauma unfortunately occurred in the church. So why does it happen? Why do trauma bonds happen? People who haven't experienced abuse, we often struggle to understand why people remain in abusive relationships. And you've probably seen it, you've probably heard it, right? You know somebody who is in an abusive relationship, and the first thing we say, I just don't understand why they just won't leave. right? Or you know people that are experiencing like maybe different forms of abuse, maybe not in relationship, in different avenues. You have friends and you know those friends are, mistreating an individual, they're using them, like all of the things. Like we can step outside from it and see it, but it's like the person that's in the middle of it, they don't have a perception of it, they can't see it. And again, on the outside looking in, we're like, I just don't understand why they want to get out of that relationship. You may even try to help them get out. You may even try to offer them a safe space. You may try to offer them some sort of safe haven, but they can't because they've trauma bonded. And again, we're going to talk about what happens chemically as to why, chemically, like as far as in your body, why it becomes so difficult for people to free themselves from trauma bonds. So they believe you're perfectly capable of leaving. So that's people on the outside looking in, feel that a person that is experiencing these traumatic situations, they have the power to be able to leave. In reality, the fact that they've now formed this trauma bond makes it extremely difficult. And you know that it's a trauma bond because they can't leave, right? Because for many people that may have never experienced abuse and there's no traumatic connection, you go out and maybe, you dating a guy or you dating a girl, and the first time they talk loud to you or even think about putting their hands on you, you're like, oh, no, this, you get out of it immediately, right? Because there is no trauma bond. Well, that's because we have any trauma that is now connecting us. And the responses that typically happen with the person that's experienced trauma, it doesn't go off. Like we don't get the oxytocin release, we don't get the endorphins, we don't get the serotonin, because people that have trauma bonded, they have these emotions that are released even though they're being mistreated, which almost acts like a glue and bonds them to that relationship. That's why it's called a bonding. People don't choose abuse. So keep that in mind. If you're working with somebody or if you know somebody who finds themselves in a, abusive relationship, whether it's emotional or physical, know that they're not choosing that. And we may think, well, you're there because you want to be there. I just don't believe anybody wants to be abused. You just can't convince me of that. And if you sit down and talk to a victim who has been abused as an adult, they will tell you that I don't want this, but I don't know how to get out. I can't get out. Like they're being held captive unwillingly. They also can't help the development of trauma bonds, which are driven by pretty strong biological processes. So let's talk just for a second about what these biological processes look like. All right. So the freeze response. So let me give you a little bit of insight of what happens in the brain, because I did this again on Saturday. But I think, for those of you that may just be hearing about this, just to have an understanding of the structure of the brain and what happens, this may be helpful for you. So the brain is structured. So I'm going to do Don Siegelman's, it's called the hand model of the brain. And so this represents our brain. This is our right brain. This is our amygdala. This is our brain stem, spinal cord, and then it goes all the way down into our gut. In your gut, you have neuroreceptors that send responses, send signals up to the brain, right? The amygdala. The amygdala is the right brain. It's your emotional brain. It's also where your threat response system is. It's where panic is. It's where fight or flight is. It's where all of the big emotions are. On top of that, you have your prefrontal cortex. Your brain kind of sits like this. The prefrontal cortex is considered your left brain. It's your logical brain. It's where your reason is. It's where your logic is. All the things that make sense is in your left brain. Well, a person that has experienced trauma, especially over an extended period, the left brain is a little bit looser. So what does that look like? This person is going to be maybe a little bit more emotional. They may carry bigger emotions. They get angry quicker. Maybe sometimes you find it difficult to engage with them logically. They do things that just don't make sense. Well, because their prefrontal cortex is not as engaged. That's what trauma does to the brain. I'm going to do a whole live about trauma in the brain. Like, y'all, I'm a nerd. But I am. I'm going to do a whole live about trauma in the brain, just so you can get that piece. But so left brain, logic. When everything is working well together, it's tightly fit. My logic overrides my emotion. Are you getting that? So when I'm in my right mind, everything's going good, I'm not emotionally triggered. Maybe I don't have the residue of trauma on my brain. So my left brain, my logic, overrides my emotions, right? So even though I'm mad, I can be like, oh my God, mad. My logic kicks in and say, Holly, you can't cuss them out because you're going to lose your job, right? Just an example. Or it may kick in and say, Holly, you can't punch them, you might go to jail. That's my logic. Tells me you can't do certain things, right? Well, if this isn't functioning well, it's broken, it's disengaged because of trauma. Then my right brain kicks in and I'm living in my emotions, right? I'm always emotional. So when a person is experiencing a trauma bond, they already have a loose prefrontal cortex. Their left brain is not working adequately anyway. So what happens is they have a fight or flight response. This is the right brain. That's the emotional piece. And because I'm not logical and able to pull myself out of it, my right brain automatically kicks in. Your body's automatic response to any perceived threat, that's fight or flight, right? If I perceive a threat, and it does not matter if it's a legitimate threat or not. Prime example, you ever met somebody who's good, big, and grown, and like maybe they scared of dogs, right? They're scared of dogs. And maybe they've had a traumatic experience, maybe when they were little, maybe they were chased by a dog, they were bit by a dog, but for whatever reason, something has been ingrained in their mind that when they see a dog, they panic. Either they're going to fight, like they're going to try to kill your little puppy, or they're going to run, right? Because immediately, oh, that's the thing about trauma. It speeds up the reaction process, where it's I don't have trauma ingrained. Or if I'm able to be more logical, I can go through a thought process and come up with a reason. I can reason within my own mind and process appropriately. Well, that doesn't happen when somebody's already in the right brain. Because remember, the prefrontal cortex is already loose because of trauma. So again, going back to somebody who's afraid of dogs. So maybe they're afraid of dogs. They come to your house and you got a little puppy. I mean, little 5-pound puppy, harmless, right? And maybe they didn't know you had a puppy, or they walk in, or maybe you have a little bit bigger dog, but your dog is harmless, like it's friendly. They see that dog, and what do? They panic. If you don't get your dog, I mean, they showing out. And what do we say? Oh, it don't bite. It don't bite. It ain't gonna bother you. And it can be a puppy. It does not matter to them. Why? Because they have been triggered. Being triggered is when somebody flips their lid, they panics. The threat response system is activated because they perceive a threat. It doesn't matter that you don't perceive the dog as a threat. Their perception is their reality. So because they perceive that little Fifi is a threat, they flip their lid. There is no logic. You cannot talk to them. You telling them the dog don't bite. You telling them stop running. You talking. You cannot reason with emotion, the amygdala. You can't talk to the right brain. So when that happens and they flip their lid, they are no longer logical. They are all in their right brain. They are emotional. So that's why they're not hearing you. It may take a series of different steps for them to kind of pull it back together and be able to calm down, right? So that's what fight or flight response looks like. The other response may be fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? So those are other reactions that may have. And freeze means they may not do anything. When you face abuse or fear the possibility of future abuse, your brain recognizes the impending distress and sends a warning sign to the rest of your body. Adrenaline, I talked about adrenaline on Saturday, and cortisol, the stress hormones, flood in, jump starting your survival instinct and triggering an emotional and physical tension. Talking about trauma bonding. So hormones play a part in this too. Hormones can be powerful reinforcers. You only have to look at dopamine's role in addiction to find support for this. So there are some people, because of how they're structured, you may have one person who can, maybe do a hard drug like cocaine and they're not addicted. You may have another person who just looks at it, right? I'm just being like really extreme. They may take a little bit of hit of the cocaine and they are like addicted for life. What's the difference? Why is one person addicted by taking that one little hit, and then the other person may do it off and on for years and can pick it up and stop and drop it, right? And it would be true to any other drug. Some people can drink and they never become alcoholics, where you have some people who had, their first drink, in college or whatever, and they've been an alcoholic ever since, and it's completely ruined their life, where it's because of dopamine, right? And the way that we produce it, but also the way that the body processes it. Some people, their brains are hardwired. They have addictive personality. They are hardwired for addiction. So now it becomes more so genetic. In most cases, you can look through a family line and you can tell, like, maybe the drug that has held that family captive. Maybe, all the men are alcoholics, or, maybe all the women are addicted to sex. Yes, they call sex can be addictive, right? And so you can tell what they are addicted to by looking at the patterns of behavior in that family. So, after an incident of abuse, the period of calm that often follows can feel your stress and fear. And so that is where the dopamine response comes from. Apologies, gifts, physical affection offered by the abusive person serve as rewards that help reinforce the rush of relief and trigger the release of dopamine. That's why it's hard for them to get out. That's why it's so easily for them to bond, because they get tore down, whether physically, emotionally. And then when they come and apologize, it releases dopamine, which feels good, right? So now we become not only addicted to the pattern of toxic behavior, we also find ourselves addicted to the feeling that comes after. It's almost like we search for it. So you may even have some circumstances where you'll have a person who will provoke a situation. Like, they will provoke the other person to get upset with them. They will provoke the other person to act out in a manner, only not because they wanted them to act out, but they were addicted to the feelings that come after. They were addicted to the dopamine, the aftermath. Since dopamine creates feelings of pleasure, it can strengthen your connection with the abuser. Oh, I hope I'm helping y'all today. Dopamine creates feelings of pleasure. It can strengthen the connection with the abuser. You want the dopamine boost, so you continue to try to make them happy to earn their affection. All right, I'm going to stop real quick because, like I said, my comments aren't showing, to see if I have any questions, any comments. If you guys have any comments, make sure you are talking to me. If you're watching, say hello. Just trying to make sure that my comments are working. Still learning how to use this stuff, but I'm getting a little bit better. At least I got my title right today. That's progress. And I'm going to cut my fan on because it's hot. All right. So, physical affection or intimacy also prompt the release of oxytocin. So we talked about dopamine, which is a feel-good hormone, but also oxytocin, right? Oxytocin is another feel-good hormone that can further strengthen bonds. Not only does oxytocin promote connection and positive feelings, it can also ease fear. So oxytocin can be considered the love hormone. It can be considered the love drug. Have you heard of the drug Oxy? It's a form of the hormone, right? That's why when people take this drug, you can see them, like, maybe, or hear about them in club environments where, they're just like all over each other. They love each other. Like, it's the feel good drug. That's oxytocin. Physical affection from an abusive partner then might dim distress and emotional pain, making it easier to focus on the positive treatment. So let's talk about the stages that are common in trauma bonds and attachment relationships. So the first stage is love bombing. Have y'all heard that before? Love bombing. Love bombing. Like, she dropped a bomb on me, baby. Right. Love bombing. Well, what is it? This is when your partner showers you with attention and gifts at the beginning of the relationship in order to win you over, and then stops abruptly. So it's like they reel you in. People that are narcissistic are really good at this. In most cases, a person that's narcissistic, if you're meeting them, like maybe for the first time, a lot of times, especially in relationships, you don't even know they're narcissistic because they love bomb. They give you all of the love, all of the attention, all of the flowers. Like they do all of the things that cause you to now release oxytocin, right? The feel good hormones. So now you're like, oh, he's so sweet or she's so kind. And it lets your guard down. It makes you more vulnerable and they get themselves in. Like them love bombing you is opening up the doorway, right? It's the gateway because the Bible says, guard your heart. But if we are not guarding our heart, it would be very easy for us to now become a victim of love bombing. Another thing that happens is frequent mood swings. Then your partner may be loving and attentive for a minute and then cruel and abusive the next. This inconsistency keeps you on your toes and creates an emotional roller coaster, up and down, that's hard to adjust to, right? So then the issue is trust and dependency. Because your partner is often so unpredictable, you may start to depend on them for your emotional needs. This can make it very hard to leave the relationships. Let's put a plug there. That is why it is so important. And I get it. I don't know if we ever arrive to a place of being fully healed. But you should at least be on your way. Because if you are not even addressing the areas of your woundedness, if you are not addressing the areas where you are unhealed, if you are not addressing the areas where you've been traumatized, we now seek validation from others. We seek validation from the relationship. We'll seek validation from the job. We'll seek validation from our friends. And yes, sometimes we even seek validation from the church. Because again, the church can also be the place that we were traumatized. I ain't come to preach to y'all today. I came to teach. I'm just teaching y'all. This is Therapy Tuesday. But it is important that you work on you. Right. But in order for you to work on you, you got to at least acknowledge, you know what? I am unhealed in this area. I am hurt in this area. I was traumatized in this area. The first step to being healed is to acknowledge that you were even wounded. Y'all can take that and make that your post for today. Now, no, you don't, because I'm going to do a reel. That's going to be my reel for today. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, low self-esteem. Again, talking about the live that I did over the weekend, how we develop low self-esteem, and it's because being wounded as a child, where maybe you were told that you weren't good enough. Maybe, you were told that, you stupid just like your daddy. I think that sometimes we underestimate how much bullying affects children. Because they always say, sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. As an adult, like, hands up. Did you realize that was a lie? Like, I would much rather have a broken bone, I think, than the emotional scars and some of the emotional damage that can come from, being bullied. There's a disorder that sometimes adults struggle with that comes from bullying, and is called body dysmorphic disorder. And typically, or in some cases, these are individuals who maybe were overweight growing up, and they were always ridiculed, like maybe by family for being fat, being overweight. They were just beat down because of their weight. And maybe they get to a place where, as an adult, or maybe, in late teens, and they go to the gym, they work out, they lose weight, right? And for us looking at them, we would think, man, they've lost their weight, they look really good, but they struggle. They struggle with body dysmorphic disorder. I follow a lot of bodybuilders on Instagram, and there is one guy who he won Mr. Olympia. Like, Mr. Olympia is like the competition of all competitions. He won that, but he came out a little while ago and talked about how he struggled with body dysmorphic disorder. And the dude is huge. Like, he's huge. He has all the muscles, right? But for him to come out and say that he struggles with his self-esteem, he struggles with his view of himself. And I don't know if he talked about like maybe where that comes from, but I'm just giving you an example of how people that were talked down to, like maybe in childhood, it can create this low self-esteem to the point that they now struggle with being able to accept their bodies. And it's a whole DSM classified disorder called body dysmorphic disorder. So if you want to, know more about it, then definitely do a little bit of research. Criticism, your partner may find ways to criticize you, even if it's something small. They may also try to control your behavior and tell you what you can and can't do. And we're talking about how trauma bonds are formed and what they look like. Manipulation, your partner may use manipulation tactics to get you to do what they want. For example, they may guilt you into staying in a relationship or threaten to hurt themselves if you leave. Now, that's one that I've definitely seen a lot working with couples, is that when one person decides that they want to get out of the relationship, the one that has like maybe been creating the trauma bond or trying to keep them captive, if they realize that nothing that they're doing is working, then their last straw is to say, well, if you leave me, I'm gonna kill myself. If you leave me, I'm gonna die. And it's a form of manipulation, because it plays on the back of the other person's mind, like, man, what if they do kill themselves? And in some cases, some people are so determined to continue to inflict further injury and cause more trauma to the person, they will kill themselves. And they'll leave this horrible note and say, this is all your fault. So now the person that wanted to get out of the relationship, but maybe didn't have the strength to do it because of the trauma bond, now they have the guilt that they carry because this person killed themselves. So even in the grave, that person is still traumatizing them. And so again, that's why it's important to, go through inner healing, deliverance, and get you a therapist to kind of work through some of that stuff. The other tactic is giving up control. In order to please your partner, you may start to give up control of your life. You may do things you don't want to do or put their needs above your own. Ooh, here's another good one, losing yourself. It's common for people in trauma bonds to lose themselves in the relationship. So you may find it no longer possible to have hobbies or interests outside of your partner. Your sense of self may become wrapped up in the approval or disapproval. And so, one of the other things that I found is especially dealing with women who go through divorce. And to some degree, if the relationship doesn't work out, we might assume that there may be a form of trauma bonding that happens, in the relationship, that maybe led to the divorce. But many women, when they go through a divorce, they often struggle with identity. And that's why you may see women who, get divorced. And I mean, they live in their best life. I mean, they live in their best life. It's because they're on this journey to find themselves. Can I be honest? Because this is Therapy Tuesday. And, this is a safe space because y'all in my office. Safe space. I can remember going through that. It didn't last long because I realized that was not the life for me. But when I got divorced, I struggled so bad. Number one, nobody told me that getting divorced is a grief process. Nobody told me that. But going through a divorce is a grieving process, especially if you look at what happens in the spiritual. We may sign our name on the dotted line of a divorce decree in the natural, but in heaven, my spirit is still connected to this person. And so now you have to deal with the soul attachment that comes from being married. And when you divorce a person, that soul bond is somewhat broken. And so even though you were married to them, you have to go through and now break the soul tie because your soul has been connected to them. And that's why it feels like a grieving process. And for many women that are going through divorce or have divorced, they don't know who they are anymore because they may have felt that they've spent their best years with this person. Two, many women have been, mothers. They've poured their entire life into being a mother. So now their identity has been stripped away. So no longer am I a wife, right? Because that's a part of their identity. I identify, I am the wife of, right? So that title is gone, right? And then sometimes too, people wait until their children are older before they get a divorce. And so although you may be a mother, your children don't need you in the same capacity that they used to need you. And so now you have a void. right? And so you find that you've lost yourself in the marriage. And so women go on this journey to find themselves. Um, and also that's a good time to maybe, get in therapy or walk through deliverance and healing, because going through a divorce is a traumatic experience, whether people tell you that or not. I don't care how much you wanted out of the marriage, because I wanted out because it wasn't healthy, but it still affected me. Like, I had probably never been so depressed till I went through a divorce, and I didn't know why, because I thought I was going to be happy and I was about to live my best life. Not so. I probably need to do a live on that too. Like, what what does divorce do to the soul? All right. So, addiction to the cycle. Even though the abuse is painful, you may find yourself addicted to the cycle of abuse. The highs and lows become addicting. You may start to feel like you need your partner in your life in order to just be okay. So, what happens when you're trauma bonded? You may feel like you're inseparable from the other person. It is usually considered a type of love addiction, and the cycle is somewhat similar to substance abuse. Likewise, you'll most likely go through the following stages you'll in this type of relationship. The first stage is when you develop a strong attachment to someone who is abusive, or you become deeply involved in an abusive situation. And you can also replace someone with something. Sometimes people can get involved in different religious sects, SECT, and they have a trauma bond with it, or it may be an organization. It may be, you maybe can even trauma bond with work, because I know that some people work in very toxic and hostile work environments. So when I'm going through this, don't just think about a someone. Maybe it could be a something as well. Two, over time, you start to believe that you deserve the abuse or that you are responsible for it. So now you take ownership. Oh, I shouldn't have done this to make them mad, or, I'm unworthy. And so I deserve what's happening to me. This can happen because the abuser tells you that you deserve it. And now you believe it. So a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So if you think that you deserve it, now you believe it. And nobody can convince you otherwise. This can happen because the abuser tells you that you deserve it, or because you start to believe that you are responsible for the abuser's behavior. Next, you start to feel like you need the abuser in your life, even though they are abusive. This happens because the abuser has become a source of both positive and negative attention. And you even, may talk to people, if I've heard this, when you're like, well, why are you with them? And, well, it's like, it's better than being by myself, or, it's better than this. And you're like, what? Like, you're being abused. But some people, because they fear being alone so bad, they rather be in a situation that's toxic and abusive than be by themselves. And it could be too that the pain of aloneness, that pain hurts much more than being in a situation with someone or something that is also causing the abuse, because that feels a void. Even though it's toxic, even though it's abusive, it feels a void, where when you have this aloneness, you don't have anything to fill the void. And what typically happens is, if you don't come up or develop healthy coping strategies to be able to now deal with the aloneness, you will fill it with another toxic relationship, another toxic situation, or other toxic behaviors, sleeping around, drinking. Another toxic behavior can be like you work too much. Talking about me, right? That was something that I did early on, as a way to, just feel pain. Like, I realized that the other things were not me. And so I just work. Like, I would work all the time because it filled the void. And somebody on the outside looking in may say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, it is, because it depends on your motive. And my motive was, I didn't want to feel what I was feeling. So I'll just work it away. That didn't work. In the final stage, you become so invested in the relationship that you are willing to tolerate any abuse in order to stay in it. This happens because the abuser has become the most important person in your life. So, to some degree, you have made this abuser a God, lowercase g. The Bible tells us that God, big G, is a jealous God. And he said that you should have no other God before me. And so now we've placed this abuser on a pedestal, and they've now become our idol. So it even has a spiritual ramification in that I worship the ground that this person walks on, even though they're abusive. And now I've placed them above God, right? Because of the importance that I feel that they have in my life. And then you can imagine living without them, and your efforts to fix them override your own self-care and growth. So this is the other mistake that people make, especially when they've trauma bonded. In the back of their mind somewhere, they feel that they have the ability to now change this person. They think that if they love them hard enough that they'll change, or they feel that if they just stop doing the things that is causing this person to get upset, then they'll treat them better or they'll do better. That's not how that works, because the way that they're treating you has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's about them and their self-control and them feeding their own insecurities and them feeding their own traumas, right? So you can't love them enough to make them stop. And because you're so vested in getting them to function at a better level, now you've neglected your own self-care, your own growth, and you've stifled your development because you're so invested in trying to make them grow. Growth is a personal decision. A person can't make you grow. We have free will. So, how to know if it's a love bond, how to know if it's love or if it's trauma bonding. While every relationship is different, it can be fraught with various patterns of behavioral and emotional exchange at different stages. There are some clues that can help you discern between healthy love and what's a trauma bond. So, here we go. Love is built on trust, respect, and equality. Love is built on trust, it's built on respect, and it's built on equality. While a trauma bond is more likely to be based on power, imbalance, control, and fear. Love is voluntary and empowering. Trauma bonding is often coerced or forced, and you may feel trapped, stuck, or powerless to leave. Love is selfless and supportive. Trauma bonding is often selfish, destructive, and it's disruptive. Love is positive and stable. Trauma bonding dwells on the negative and thrives on instability. So I hope that this information was helpful for you. I'm going to do a lot better because I actually enjoy talking about these types of things, giving you Bible, but also psychology at the same time. And so just giving you an understanding of trauma bonding. I'm kind of like, I guess you not really call it a series, but I started off on Saturday, talking about healing the inner child. And so, what usually comes out of that is when we have an unhealed child is trauma bonding. And so I wanted to make sure that you understood what that looked like. And I'm sure that this was helpful to somebody who may find themselves, in a trauma bond situation. If you would like to maybe do a free consult and maybe explore more from a therapeutic standpoint, like maybe your situation, go to my website, www.themultifacetedsoul.com, and you can fill out the form and we can do like a free 30-minute consult. I would love to be able to help you and take you on a journey to healing and wholeness. Also, for my single women, I do have a book and therapeutic workbook that you can also grab from my website. It is called The Wow Factor, The Single Woman's Journey to Wholeness. And it is a book and a workbook. Every copy that is ordered from my website, I sign personally. And I also give you a couple of little trinkets inside your bag. So go out and support. Also, if you're catching this on the replay, please let me know that you watched this by replay. Let me know if this was helpful. If there are other topics that you guys would like to know more about, I would be happy to do a live on something that is geared more towards your interests, but we're going to be in this, inner the healing child and understanding how trauma shows up in relationships just for a little bit. So as always, please share this on your page, tag somebody in the comments. Like you ain't got to, rat them out if like, girl, this is you. You in a trauma bonded relationship. Just tag them in the comments. We won't have to know what it's about. But seriously though, I hope this lunchtime Therapy Tuesday was good for you. So thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me. And until next time.